So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
The American president swears on the Bible to uphold the Constitution, not the other way around. But can you really separate politics from religion? And in the borough of Churches, who's God's candidate?
Well, first of all, God doesn't belong in our political system.
I think religion to some extent should stay out of politics.
I'm going to make my own decision. A deity of any sort is not going to influence it.
At last count, some 2.6 million people call Brooklyn home, and 1 in 4 of them is Jewish. Going strictly by the numbers, you'd likely be tempted to think of Brooklyn's Jews as a monolith, and you'd be wrong. Here at the Bay Ridge Jewish Center, they are bound to the Torah, but have a decidedly more relaxed interpretation of the Torah in action, even at the polls. Now's a good time for me to mention I visited the synagogue during Purim, a celebration of a triumph of the tribe over political forces seeking to destroy them. I just wonder, as you as a spiritual leader, when you step into the voting booth, is God in there with you?
I want to start the conversation and make sure people are having the conversation, but it's not for me to ever share my political views, at least publicly. Personally, I think my religion very much coalesces my belief in God with who I vote for.
I mean, the separation of church and state, but I think that AIPAC is an important lobbying organization to get support for Israel.
The American Israel Public Affairs Committee is one of the most influential lobbying groups in the U.S. Their annual conference was addressed by every presidential candidate this year, except Bernie Sanders.
It's a given that any candidate should be in strong support of Israel.
Trump spoke all about how we should not only give to Israel, we should give 3 times the amount to Israel. 5 minutes before, he'd gone on the record saying that Israel needed to pay back everything that we had given them for Iron Dome. So 2 totally different views, 2 different audiences.
One person.
One person.
And that's part of the problem with Israel and the Palestinians. It becomes a political and religious issue when they're really 2 different things.
Are you telling me that you wouldn't wake up with a little lift in your step if a member of the tribe, say Bernie Sanders, found himself president?
No.
I must say that it's interesting, and I think over the next few weeks, more of his Jewishness comes out.
Really?
I'm happy he's running because it makes
that's
people...
been the criticism, that he's put his Jewishness on the back burner, that he's not been the Jewish candidate.
Well, first of all, again, we're not a Jewish state that he should be the Jewish candidate. He is an American, and in a country that he should be the American candidate. Now, I'm not saying that the Judaism...
a little swell
yes, it does.
up,
Of course. Listen, when the scale is even, then these little perks help.
I met with Rabbi Het to talk politics and shop for Shabbos, the Friday night meal that begins Judaism's day of rest. If you had to define it, what is the Jewish vote?
There is no real Jewish vote. I, different than other Chabad leaders, have permission from the Rebbe, because my father had it before me, to actually endorse a candidate.
So maintaining that separation between government and your sanctity as a religion, what's that dance?
We must work with government. The Talmud speaks about the rabbis of old, of how they worked. Alexander the Great asked the rabbis, why don't you endorse candidates? Why don't you get involved politically? He says, well, we know that the world of politics is a dirty world. He says, well, why don't you work with us and then guide us and help us? And that's my policy.
Okay, so considering all that, I'm just gonna wrap this up by asking you, Rabbi, who is God's candidate?
Every candidate that believes in God and is godly in their manner, and godliness, by the way, does not start or end in the church or in the synagogue or in the mosque. You can see the ones who fear God and don't fear God. They have respect for other people, because at the end of the day, if we infuse godliness, we'll all be better at what we do.
But I don't think God's picking a candidate.
Honestly, I don't think it would get pulled for any of them.
God didn't put a candidate in this time, that's for sure.
So who's God's candidate? Ask and answer.